So does anybody like people watching? You know, it can be a fascinating thing when you get into a room and you get to sit back and watch how different families do things, how different cultures do things. So I had two events this week. One of them was the Interfaith event last Wednesday, where we had a couple hundred people there at the Frisco Library, and we had, representation from the Jewish community, several Christian communities, Muslim, Hindu, Baha'i, pagan, and there's several I'm forgetting about. But just the diversity within that room was really, really interesting to watch, and the way in which people approach things, trying to be faithful to where they were from, but then also the way in which, whether it was because, my family's been in the United States for generations. I don't even know when they came. But at some point, way in the past, they came over here and they brought their faith with them and they lived in them. For many of the people, for many of the communities here in Frisco, they may be the first generation here in the United States. And so they're not only bringing their way of faith with them, they're also bringing their traditions they came with from their home with them. And one of the things I told them, and this applies to the sermon, is, each of us within our faith traditions have something that applies to our role as faithful people for the healing of the world. When Jesus talks about the salt in the Sermon on the Mount, so salt in the ancient world is not primarily for flavoring. In a world before refrigeration, salt is primarily for preservation. That's how you kept meat from spoiling, was you salted it to where it would spoil. That's why people still eat jerky and things like that today. And so when Jesus says you're to be the salt of the earth, it's not that you're to be that spice or that seasoning for the earth. You're to be that which makes the earth possible. You're to be that which keeps it from rotting away. Now, I also, yesterday, we had a preschool from just north of here graduate here at Rejoice, use our facility to do graduation. And was really cool, but also, again, getting to be a people watcher and look out over who was present in the midst of a preschool that's less than 2 miles away from our location. And was a very, very diverse group. There were a couple Caucasian families. There were some families that were black, and again, some of the black families I'm pretty sure were from like North Africa. Just by the way they were dressed and by the way they interacted. You had Middle Eastern, you had, of course, Indian, you had Asian, you had this kind of weird conglomeration of all these different people and cultures, and you could see in the way in which they interacted with their kids, and just also the interaction of the time. So, when we say a service starts at 8:30, I'm walking in at 8:29. You can set your clock by it pretty much. If I'm not here at 8:29, somebody's going out to get me. And we started at 8:30. They were supposed to start at 10 o'clock. It was closer to 10:30. Again, just a little bit different understanding of what time is like and how it works. Just seeing the way in which different families were interacting with their kids, and different families by different cultures interact with their kids a little differently. And to be able to sit back there and watch that and say, it's a little bit chaotic, it's a little bit weird, it's a little bit different and uncomfortable maybe, and yet somehow, even in the midst of the uncomfortableness, and I'm sure the uncomfortableness for some of the families out there too, it still worked. So, I'm going to start with our reading from Acts today. So the reading from Acts today is on the aftermath of Judas committing suicide. And so one of the 12 is no longer there. And as I was thinking about this sermon, kept coming up with different songs, but one of the songs that came up to me was a song called One More Light. And who cares if one more light goes out in the sky of a million stars? But the answer to that question was, and the song's ultimately about suicide. It's about, a person who contemplating suicide. And unfortunately, the singer of the song, I guess less than a year later, committed suicide. But I think that sometimes, it's the fact that life has to go on. And that somebody has to take up and carry on with what's going on. And as we go through the seasons, we've lit candles throughout this season. Part of it is, we carry on. We carry on in this ministry. We carry on in this. And one of the maybe I'm the only person who finds humor in this, but when they're talking about who are we going to pick, and so you have the son of Barsabbas, and again, you have this whole thing where, this person, son of Barsabbas, also called Matthias, and then there's Justus. And so you have this whole long name for this one person, and then you have Justus. And who gets picked? Justus. It's not the person with here's all that we should be able to say about this person. It's the person who, oh yeah, here's the actor. Here's the person who carries on. And I wonder how many times in the midst of this, it's not the person who you would pick and say, that's the person who's going to carry the flame. That's the person. It's the person who, okay, no, that's who God chose. That's who God used in the midst of this. And sometimes, we have our minds set on this is the way it's all going to work out, and I'm guilty of that. I am certainly guilty of saying this is how it's all going to work out, and then God says, but here's where the gifts I placed are. In the psalm for today, this is the psalm that begins the book of Psalms, and it's put there intentionally to kind of be like a guide to how do you read this book. It's like not to pick on Gus as the poetry person, but as a poetry person, when I put together a book of poems, I put the first poem there for a reason. Kind of give this is what's coming. This is kind of something to give shape to what's coming. And I love this particular image from the first Psalms where, it's like being a tree that's planted by streams of water where they yield their fruit in season and the leaves do not wither. For those who, I'm going to guess that most people won't catch this. But you know what the last image in the Bible is? It's of a river flowing from the city of God, and on that river there are trees that are planted on each side of the river, and they sink their roots deep and they bear fruit every single season. This is an image that at the beginning of the Bible, it's in the middle of the Bible here in Psalms, and it's at the end. And I do think that what the Psalms is trying to say is that we as people of God, we're people who we sink our roots deep into these waters that God gives us. And even when the seasons get dry, even if the creek bed dries up, there's typically still water running underneath the creek bed. And that's where the trees continue to get their nourishment from. It's from those waters that are there and they run deep. And there are different trees that do different things. There are some trees that put their roots really deep. There are some trees that put their roots really shallow. There are some trees that only live by streams, and there are some trees that live out in the middle of nowhere. But I think that one of the things that we do over and over again is part of our coming back here is so that we can be by the waters and we can set our roots in. As I take in John, and John's gospel is always on the one hand, it's easy to preach. It's also one of the harder ones for me to kind of grasp as a whole because it just goes in so many different directions. I really think that John, as he's writing the gospel, they didn't diagnose people with ADD back then, but John is a little bit ADD to me, where it's like, oh, here, shiny, new image, let's go this way. But I do feel like the kind of the overall piece of this is Jesus praying for his disciples. And the reason he's praying for his disciples is there to be a gift. There to be a gift in the midst of the world. It's going to be a gift that's not always received. It's It's not always going to be welcome. It's not always going to be understood. Because it's a gift, just like the gift of faith that comes from God. It sometimes is received, sometimes it's not. But it's a gift in the midst of the world. It's part of the way God's way of showing love to the midst of this world. That, just like I was talking about with the image at the beginning of being that salt which preserves. You're to be that gift that I sent. That light, that gift, that tree. All these things are these, different images pointing to different ways in which you're to be something in the midst of the world. You're my light, which provides light in the midst of darkness. You are my gift, which is that gift of love. You are that tree that sinks its roots deep, that provides shade and cover and fruit in the midst of the world. Because this is a world that God loves. And I know that there are lots of things that we can be distracted by and say, there's so many problems. There's so many things that we can't handle. There's so many things that seem like they're so much bigger than us. And the good news is it's not all on our shoulders. But there are ways in which, this is the individual life that we contribute. This is the individual fruit which we bear. This is the preservation of this area which we have. And this is the gift that we bring with our lives to the world around us.